I'm calling to order this meeting. This is an additional meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. The time is 11:24 in the morning, and this meeting is being held in the Council Chambers, Room 500 of the Johnny Wilson Building, although I believe at least one member is participating virtually. And this meeting is being broadcast on Council Channel 13, as well as on the council's website, which is www.dccouncil.gov. This is an additional meeting, not a regularly scheduled meeting. There are 3 measures for markup in the Committee of the Whole, and there are something like, I'm going to say 14 or 16 measures that were reported out of other committees that will go through the usual process to get on the legislative agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. We begin our Committee of the Whole meetings determining whether we have a quorum. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson.
Present.
Councilmember Allen. Here. Councilmember Bonds.
Here.
Councilmember Fruman.
Present.
Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember McDuffie. Councilmember McDuffie. Councilmember Nadeau.
Here.
Councilmember Parker. Here. Councilmember Pinto.
Present.
Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Trayon White. Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Give me just a second. All right, we're going to have fun right now. We have the Secretary's report of committee filings, and I'm going to recognize Councilmember Bonds. If you would move to waive the reading of the log.
Mr. Chairman, I move to waive the reading of the Secretary's log.
This is of the committee reports. So there's been a motion to waive the reading. Is there discussion? On the motion to waive the reading, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We have the Secretary's log of introductions and referrals. Councilmember Bonds, you did a great job. Councilmember Bonds, you want to move the waiving of the Secretary's log?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move.
Been a motion to waive the reading of the Secretary's log of introductions and referrals. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Councilmember McDuffie.
I do actually have a question. About a particular referral, the B25 1003, the vibrant bill that's
Yes.
reduced was only referred to the committee in the whole with comments from the Committee on Executive Administration, but it's my understanding, a quick read, that it consistently amends Title 47 of the code, which is, as you know, with the Committee on Business and Economic Development.
As I recall, it amends a whole lot of different titles in the code. So you're asking for comments?
That it be also referred to the committee.
Let me take it under the advisement and let me take it under advisement.
Okay.
Anything else with regard to the Secretary's log? The motion is on the Secretary's log, waiving the Secretary's log. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We have 3 measures for markup in the Committee of the Whole. The first is PR 25-728, Citizen Review Panel, Dr. Wanda Thompson Reappointment Resolution of 2024. This is an appointment of the council, not a confirmation. The purpose of PR 25-728 is to reappoint Dr. Thompson as a member of the Citizen Review Panel for a 3-year term to end on April 11, 2027. With regard to the Citizen Review Panel in 2004, the council approved the Child in Need of Protection Amendment Act. The purpose of that 2004 act was to reform the district's child protection law. More importantly, the goal of the council was to create a seamless and effective system for responding to any type of child mistreatment, whether child abandonment, abuse, or neglect. An outcome of the 2004 Act was to codify the establishment of the Citizen Review Panel. The panel serves as an independent oversight body for the district's child welfare system to evaluate the district government agencies involved in child protection as well as services provided by vendors. The panel consists of 15 members, all of whom must be district residents. The mayor is required to appoint 8 members of the panel and must designate the chairperson. The council shall appoint 7 members of the panel and is required to designate the vice chairperson. Further, the panel is required to be broadly representative of the community and must include members who have expertise in the prevention and treatment of child abuse and neglect. In addition, the appointees to the panel should have a diversity of professional backgrounds and must be familiar with the child welfare system. So at one of the earlier meetings this fall, the council appointed, I believe it was 6 members, and Dr. Thompson is the 7th member. Dr. Thompson is a Ward 5 resident. She used to be a Ward 8 resident living in the Fair Lawn community for 40 years. She serves as the pastor of the Ambassador Baptist Church. She's a native Washingtonian. She received a Master of Divinity degree from Howard University School of Divinity. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Dickinson College. She received a master's degree and PhD from Temple University in clinical psychology. She is licensed as a psychologist in both the district and Maryland. She has also completed certificate classes in leadership development, business, and public advocacy. Dr. Thompson has served as a member of the Citizen Review Panel, and she wants to continue her service on the panel because she remains committed to its mission and wants to be of assistance in evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of those organizations involved in child protection and child welfare, particularly the Child and Family Services Agency. Assuming that this is adopted by the committee believes Dr. Thompson's significant experience as an advocate and community organizer, as well as her direct experience with CFSA through the panel, makes her a valuable member of the panel, and therefore we recommend adoption of PR 25-728. This resolution was introduced on April 23rd, 2024. Originally, it was scheduled for a hearing or roundtable on July 11th. Dr. Thompson could not make it, which is why the other appointees have already moved through the council. The Committee of the Whole held a public roundtable on Dr. Wanda Thompson's reappointment on October 7th, 2024, and the committee received no testimony or comments in opposition to the resolution. I move both the print and report with leave for staff to make technical, conforming, and editorial changes. Is there discussion? The motion will be on the print and report with leave for staff. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. No, I already said the ayes have it unanimously. Hold on a second. There's no objection. We'll reconsider the vote so that we can include all the members. Hearing no objection, I will call for the vote again on the motion, which was both the print and report. All those in favor of the print and report for PR 25-728 with leave for staff, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Madam Assistant General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report and hearing record are filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements? Actually, no, FIS is required.
Correct.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The second measure for markup is Bill 25-10, closing of public streets and alleys adjacent to squares 3039, 3040, and 3043, Clarification Amendment Act of 2024. This bill would amend DC Law 23-239 to require the DC surveyor, to record street and alley closing and dedication plats for the planned unit development at Park Morton, to record them in phases. On November 10th, 2020, the council approved DC Law 23-239, which I'm avoiding reading because it's a very long and torturous title, but it concerns Park Morton. The law closed a portion of Morton Street Northwest adjacent to Square 3040, closed a portion of a public alley in Square 3039. It accepted the dedication of 2 new streets, 6th Street and Luray Place, extended Morton Street Northwest eastward to connect with Warder Street Northwest, and accepted a dedication of land in Square 3039 for public alley purposes. The closure and dedications are facilitating the redevelopment of the Park Morton Public Housing Project, which is in Ward 1. According to the developers, the redevelopment of Park Morton is being done in phases, with Phase 1 having started in late 2021, Phase 2 having started in late 2023. The phased approach to the development necessitated emergency and temporary legislation, also introduced by Councilmember Nadeau, as was this bill before us now, to require the surveyor to record street and alley closing and dedication plats in phases, with deadlines of December 31st, 2023 for recordation of plats related to Phase 1 and December 31st, 2025 for recordation of plats related to Phase 2. Under the emergency and temporary legislation, the surveyor may extend the dates by 2 years if necessary. The committee print for Bill 25-10, which is what's before us now, is identical to the emergency and temporary versions of the legislation the council approved in 2021 and 2022. This legislation, Bill 25-10, was introduced by Councilmember Nadeau on January 9th, 2023. I can't really explain why we've taken so long to mark this up, other than that there was the emergency and temporary, which took the pressure off of doing this urgently. However, permanent legislation is necessary, which is why the Committee of the Whole held a hearing on Bill 25-10 on September 24th, 2024. There was very little testimony at the hearing. There was some opposition. Nonetheless, I'm recommending that the committee adopt this print and report and move forward with council action affirmatively. I move the print with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. Is there discussion? The vote will be on the print with leave for staff. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That was anemic. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? I don't hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. I move the report with leave for staff to make technical, conforming, and editorial changes. Is there discussion? On the report with leave for staff, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? I don't hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. Madam Assistant General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report is filed,
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Is there a fiscal impact?
There is not.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The third measure for markup in the Committee of the Whole is Bill 25-571, Seizure Safe Schools Amendment Act of 2024. This bill, when introduced, was sequentially referred first to the Committee on Health, chaired by Councilmember Christina Henderson, and then to the Committee of the Whole. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Henderson first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you and your staff for collaboration on this important legislation. The Committee on Health unanimously approved Bill 25-5. All right, you said 7-1, I have 8-1, but I'm going to assume it's one of the two, but this bill. In the district, seizures are the third most common medical emergency in schools, and approximately 700 children have been diagnosed with a seizure disorder. When a child experiences a seizure at school, they may appear confused, unresponsive, or engaged in repetitive movements. It can be critical for the adult in the room to identify the symptoms such that a child can receive the proper seizure treatment quickly and avoid medical complications. At the public hearing for this bill, we heard powerful testimony from students and school staff about the importance of teachers and other school personnel being aware of a child's diagnosed seizure disorder, be able to identify the symptoms early, and be able to assist with the administration of seizure medication when necessary. Bill 25-571 aims to address these goals in several ways. The committee print requires the individualized seizure action plans for students diagnosed with a seizure disorder that provide the school with relevant details to care, including symptoms to be aware of, and the prescription and dosage of the seizure treatment. The committee print also allows for students to self-administer seizure treatment medication in accordance with their seizure action plan. It also requires DC Health to provide seizure recognition training for school staff at least 3 times per year. I want to particularly thank the students and families and their teachers who came to testify on this particular piece of legislation. I also want to extend a gratitude to the Epilepsy Foundation, who has provided helpful research and data to inform this bill. We appreciate all of your advocacy and partnership to ensure children with seizure disorders are able to feel safe and supported throughout their school day. I also want to thank our colleagues, Councilmember Charles Ellen and Robert White and their teams for introducing and championing this important bill. I will also note that the Chief Financial Officer has reported that this bill has no cost to the district. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Give me just a second here. This is new. And this would be taken out, so you'll see. So let me add to that. And it is Bill 25-571. An earlier version of the agenda had 581. The committee of the whole, the print from the committee of the whole is the one that's going to be before us. And the committee of the whole incorporates the background and need in the Committee on Health's committee report and adopts its version of the committee print with an amendment. Now I'm reading from the report. The introduced version of Bill 25-571 would have required 2 trainings, one training for 2 staff members to recognize the signs of seizures and administer seizure medication, and another training for every staff member to recognize the signs of seizures and respond appropriately. As discussed in the Committee on Health's committee report, the administration of medication training, otherwise known as AOM training, will suffice to meet the need that 2 staff members in every school must have seizure medication administration training. However, the Committee on Health's committee print recommended that the broader seizure awareness training also teaches seizure medication and vagus nerve stimulation administration. The Committee of the Whole is striking the additional medication and vagus nerve stimulation administration requirement in the voluntary training to align the legislation with the intent of the introduced version. This change was also recommended by advocates for the legislation who had concerns that the expanded scope of the voluntary training might discourage maximal participation. So in other words, what is before us, what I'm moving is what the Committee on Health reported with this one change. The legislation was introduced by Councilmember Allen and Councilmember Robert White on November 13th last year. The Committee on Health and the Committee of the Whole held a public hearing on July 10th. The Committee on Health's markup, which Councilmember Henderson may have already noted, was October 22nd. And with that, I move the Committee of the Whole print with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you and your staff for moving this bill forward. I want to thank Councilmember Henderson and her team as well. When I spoke about this bill at the Committee on Health when it held its markup last week, just want to repeat some of what I said then. While I think we're all familiar with epilepsy as a disease or disorder, I think what we're all less familiar with is how epilepsy can affect a young person in their daily life and at school. The committee report goes into this much further, but I think it's worth emphasizing that seizures are the third most common medical emergency that occurs in schools. And here in the district, there are approximately 800 children and teens living with epilepsies. A CDC study showed that when compared with students with other health concerns, students aged 6 to 17 years old with epilepsy were more likely to miss 11 or more days of school in the past year. The study also noted that students with epilepsy were more likely to experience difficulties in school, use special education services, have limitations when it comes to playing sports or participating in other after-school activities compared to other students with other medical conditions. If you're a student living with epilepsy, daily life at school can be challenging, especially more so if you're not sure if the school is prepared to address a seizure that you may experience in the future. Every student deserves a safe and welcoming learning environment. This applies to our students living with epilepsy. I introduced the Seizure Safe Schools Amendment Act of 2024 alongside my colleague, Councilmember Robert White, because we were asking if a student has epilepsy, are students and staff ready and prepared to respond? The bill as introduced was based on model legislation that's currently in effect in 23 states, including our neighboring jurisdictions of Virginia and Maryland, although the number of components included in the model bill differ from state to state. Overall, I think that the committee print today with the changes that you and Councilmember Henderson made will make our schools safer for students who live with epilepsy and prepares our teachers, staff, and school leadership to better respond in an event that a student experiences a seizure. Before I conclude, I certainly want to extend my gratitude to the public witnesses that testified at the bill's hearing, especially our student and parent advocates who live with or know someone who lives with epilepsy. Special thank you to Molly Ellis and Oliver Teneo for your impassioned advocacy. I want to thank the Epilepsy Foundation for their advocacy as well as our partnership. And lastly, I want to thank my own Ward 6 State Board of Education Representative Brandon Best, who advocated for this policy at the State Board of Education and led the board to a resolution calling on the council to pass this legislation. So again, my appreciation to you and your team's work, to both you, Chair Mendelson, and Councilmember Henderson. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councilmember Parker and then Robert White.
I will be brief, but thank you, Chairman Mendelson. I wanted to thank Council Members Allen and Robert White for their leadership in introducing this. And as I said in committee, I think this bill in its introduction was a great example of how the State Board of Education and the council can continue to work together. This matter being before the State Board and coming from their direct engagement with schools, in addition to the work of the council members' respective teams, I think will lead to meaningful change for our students and our school communities, keeping young people safe. So all in all, I think it's a win. Thank you.
Thank you. And, you know, I said earlier when I presented that this was introduced by Councilmember Allen and Councilmember Robert White. Actually, it was introduced by 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 members. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm proud to have co-introduced this bill with 9 members, co-authored it with Councilmember Allen, and also want to thank State Board Representative Brandon Best for his work on this issue on the State Board, and want to thank Councilmember Henderson and you, Chairman Mendelson, for helping move this legislation forward. I am especially grateful to Oliver Teneo, a DC student who not only inspired this bill, but has stayed engaged throughout the process, offering testimony and feedback to strengthen it for students who may experience seizures at school. As Oliver shared with us, teachers and classmates may not always recognize when a student is having a seizure, and without basic training, they might not know how to respond. This can lead to delays in first aid or the administration of medication. This bill aims to change that. It requires schools to have seizure action plans for students who experience seizures. The plan provides school staff with essential information like symptoms to watch for, the appropriate medication or treatments, emergency contacts, healthcare provider contacts, and any special instructions. The legislation also requires DC Health to offer seizure recognition and first aid training to school personnel 3 times a year. I encourage all teachers and school staff to take advantage of this quick training. It will help you recognize the often subtle signs of a seizure, something not everyone knows how to spot. Seizures are more common than many realize, affecting 1 in 10 people at some point in their lives, yet often a seizure does not require hospitalization or medication. If passed, this measure will help any DC student with epilepsy or with who experiences seizures feel safe and more supported at school. Students will be able to focus on learning, knowing that they're in a seizure-safe environment, while school staff will feel better equipped to help quickly if a seizure occurs in the classroom. My thanks go out to the many families, teachers, healthcare providers, and the State Board of Education who passed a resolution in support of this bill's goals. And again, to Councilmember Allen for working with me to introduce this measure. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Further discussion on the bill? We have the print before us. This is the committee of the whole print with leave for staff. All those in favor of the print say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. I move the report with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion? On the report, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Madam Assistant General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Record is complete for the Committee on Health and once the report is filed for the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Is there a fiscal impact?
There is not.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. We'll turn now to measures, consideration of measures from other committees. If there's no objection, we'll consider the first two measures in block. They are confirmations of nominations to the Office of Employee Appeals. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something like the next 8 measures came out of the Committee on Executive Administration and Labor, chaired by Councilmember Anita Bonds. PR 25-810, Office of Employee Appeals, Jean Moorhead, Confirmation Resolution of 2024. And PR 25-811, Office of Employee Appeals, LaShawn Adams, Confirmation Resolution of 2024. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you stated, today I'm moving 2 nominees for the Office of Employee Appeals. The Office of Employee Appeals is an independent administrative adjudicatory agency that processes appeals filed by district government workforce. The office has judication over appeals where an employee has been removed as a result of an adverse action for cause, is placed on enforced leave or suspended for 10 days or more, subjected to reduction in force, or has an issue with a safety sensitive designation. Ms. Jean Moorhead is our first nominee. She is an experienced human resources professional with expertise in organizational development, employee relations, strategic workforce planning, employee engagement, and has a background rooted in the private sector. She is currently the Vice President of Themos Fisher Scientific, and she previously held leadership positions within the human resources at Intel, Wells Fargo, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Ms. Moorhead is a Ward 1 resident. She obtained her Bachelor's of Arts and Master's of Arts in Labor Relations and Human Resources from the University of Illinois. She is known as a committed public servant with a demonstrated commitment to human resources and employee relations, and therefore sought to be a valuable member of the Office of Employee Appeals. With that, I certainly urge the support for Ms. Moorhead's nomination, and I move the underlying resolution. The second a second nominee for the Office of Employee Appeals, PR 25-811, is Ms. LaShawn Adams. Ms. Adams is a human resources leader with over 30 years of experience in organizational management, talent acquisition, employee relations, labor relations, and employment. development within the federal government. Currently, she serves as a program manager at the Federal Aviation Administration. In her capacity as program manager, she oversees human resources policies and programs with an emphasis on workforce development, succession planning, and diversity principles. Previously, she served as Director of Human Resources at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the Supervisory Resource Specialist at the Government Printing Office. Ms. Adams is a Ward 8 resident who graduated from Howard University with a bachelor's in science in math and finance. And I move her nomination as well, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, are these two measures legally and technically sufficient for consideration?
Yes, they are.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete for each?
Yes.
Madam Budget Director, since these are appointments, fiscal impact statements are not required.
Correct.
Without objection, these two measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. If there's no objection, we'll consider the next two measures together. They are both confirmations of nominations to the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. PR 25-820, Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, Darren Sobin, Confirmation Resolution of 2024. And PR 25-821, Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, Felice Smith, Confirmation Resolution of 2024. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I'm moving the two nominations for the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. First nomination, 25-820, Darren Sobin. This is a reappointment to the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, commonly known as BEGA. As you know, BEGA investigates alleged violations of ethical violations by district government employees and public officials. BEGA is comprised of two distinct offices, the Office of Open Government and the Office of Government Ethics. The Office of Open Government ensures compliance with the district's Open Meetings Act. In addition to enforcement of the Open Meetings Act, the office advocates for fair and efficient, effective DC Freedom of Information Act, or the FOIA process. The Office of Government Ethics, which is a part of the BEGA office, serves as the district's ethics prosecutor and is empowered to bring enforcement proceedings before the 5-member Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, which in turn can levy civil penalties, including substantial monetary fines. BEGA, in fact, is governed by a 5-member board, one of which Mr. Darren Sobin currently serves as a member. And I'll start with Mr. Sobin. He is an attorney with almost 30 years, having been admitted to the DC Bar in 1995. During the 30 years of his service in the community, Mr. Sobin has developed an extensive background in legal ethics, commercial and intellectual property law, international banking law, and wrongful death litigation. Mr. Sobin currently serves as the Chief Program Officer for the DC Bar, where he oversees the Lawyer Relations Council Department, which consists of Legal Ethics Program, the Lawyer Assistance Program, the Attorney Client Arbitration Board, and the Client Security Fund. Mr. Sobin is a resident of Ward 2 and a graduate of UDC David Clark School of Law. The second nominee is Ms. Felice Smith, PR 25-821. And Ms. Smith is a licensed attorney that has been practicing for nearly 20 years. She currently serves as Vice President and Secretary to the Board of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, where she oversees the Office of the Board of Directors, which provides executive and administrative support services to the Airports Authority's 17-member Board of Directors. May I continue?
Without objection.
Thank you. She also serves as the Associate General Counsel and Ethics Officer for the Airports Authority, where she interprets Code of Ethics and provides legal and ethical compliance advice to the board members, executive management, and over 1,700 employees. Ms. Smith is a Ward 5 resident and a graduate of Howard University School of Law. She is licensed to practice in Virginia and recently became licensed in the District of Columbia. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support these nominations.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, are the two measures legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, they are.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete for each? Madam Secretary, is the record complete for each?
Yes, it is. She's frozen, it looks like so.
Madam Budget Director, these are confirmations and therefore don't require fiscal impact statements?
Correct.
Without objection, these two measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next measure is Bill 25-610, Retired Firefighter and Police Officer Redeployment Amendment Act of 2024. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you again, Chairman. Today I'm moving Bill 25-610, the Retired Firefighter and Police Officer Redeployment Amendment Act of 2023 as introduced by Councilmember Henderson. This bill creates a rehiring eligibility for retired firefighters from the Fire and Emergency Medical Services Department and police officers from the Metropolitan Police Department to serve as 911 call takers or dispatchers at the discretion of the Director of the Office of Unified Communications. These positions may be temporary, full-time, or part-time, and would not decrease the retirement benefits of a first responder. And therefore, allowing the MPD and the FEMS retiree to collect both a salary as a temporary 911 call taker or a dispatcher in addition to their full pension annuity. This bill makes permanent the provision of Bill 25-603, Retired Firefighter and Police Officer Redeployment Temporary Amendment Act of 2023, which just expired on the 12th of October, 2024. So thank you, Chairman, and I urge my colleagues to support this measure.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Does it have a fiscal impact?
It does not.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. Bill 25-752, Automatic Voter Registration Amendment Act of 2024. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill was introduced March 21, 2024 by Councilmember Allen. The bill addresses a few issues related to the Automatic Voter Registration Expansion Amendment Act of 2022, which expanded automatic voter registration. Specifically, the bill clarifies that local residents, that is, those who are not citizens, will not have their information automatically transferred to the Board of Elections. The bill also requires the Board of Elections to update information on voter rolls when a voter submits information to the Department of Motor Vehicles or Department of Healthcare Finance that differs from what the board has on file at the time that they receive the new information. In other words, the DMV and the DHCF only must update the Board of Elections when a resident updates information that is currently on their file. The Board of Elections sends notice of the change to the voter's address of record with a prepaid return letter by which the voter can confirm or correct their information. Finally, the bill changes the applicability date of the original Automatic Voter Registration Expansion Amendment Act, DC Law 24-265, from January 1, 2025 to July 1, 2025. This is to allow the Board of Elections and the DMV and the DHCF sufficient time to implement the needed changes. These changes will help ensure that DC Law 24-265 achieves what it was originally intended to achieve, namely to capture more unregistered voters and to ensure that all in our community are able to participate in our local democracy by voting for their representatives in the District of Columbia government. And I urge my colleagues to support the bill. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Does it have a fiscal
It
impact?
does not.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next measure is Bill 25-790, Rulemaking Public Comment Modernization Amendment Act of 2024. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This bill was introduced by myself on April the 9th, 2024. It requires agencies to accept written comments, both orally and in writing, making sure that every member of the public has the opportunity to participate in rulemaking process. The bill requires written comments to be accepted electronically and directs the Office of Documents and Administrative Issuance located within the Office of the Secretary to publish the proposed rulemaking on an electronic database. The bill will create consistency across the rulemaking process for all agencies of the District of Columbia government. It will also make certain that public participation, which is so essential in the process, is convenient and accessible for all district residents. I urge my colleagues to support the bill, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Does it have a fiscal impact?
It does, of 35,000 in FY '25 and 95,000 over the financial planning period.
95,000 over the four-year plan?
95, correct.
And that can't be absorbed. I know that's not for you, but that can't be absorbed. 35,000. Maybe that was rhetorical. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next measure is Bill 25-792, Notarial Acts Clarification Amendment Act of 2024. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman. This bill was introduced by me on April 22nd, 2024. As stated, the bill removes the requirement that a notary public must read and write the language of any document on which they perform a notarial act. Because of this requirement, those who need a foreign language document notarized have found it difficult to find a notary who is registered to perform notary acts in a particular language. The notary does not read the document that is being presented. However, many notary organizations advise that they should not read through a document, as that is the role of legal counsel. This bill does require that a notary read and write in the language in which the certificate is written. In other words, the notary must read and understand the language they add to the document, including the name of the signatory who appears before them and the date on which the document was signed. This reflects the notary's role, which is to confirm the identities and willingness of those signing a document. In addition, the bill makes a minor change to the requirements related to electronic notaries or e-notaries. Specifically, the bill makes the change that reflects the training on third party, or by amending the requirement that an applicant for endorsement as an e-notary completes a training course provided by the mayor. Instead, the training course will be approved by the mayor. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure, oh, is there
It does
fiscal
not have a
impact?
cost.
Does not.
Does not.
Thank you. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next measure, Bill 25-135, was reported out of two committees, Committee on Public Works and Operations, chaired by Councilmember Brianna Doe, and Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety, chaired by Councilmember Brooke Pinto. Who's going to go first?
I am.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councilmember Pinto and your staff for working with my committee to move this legislation forward. Businesses and individuals who dump illegally create untenable environmental, health, and economic harms in our communities, which are often frustrated when dumping is left unchecked. B 25-135 allows for greater enforcement and adds common sense, frequently dumped items such as appliances, mattresses, and tires to the list of items that are explicitly illegal to dump. We can do more to protect neighborhoods from the harms of illegal dumping, and this legislation moves us in that direction. The Illegal Dumping Enforcement Amendment Act was introduced by Councilmember Gray on February 10th, 2023, and sequentially referred first to my committee and then to the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety. The two committees held a joint hearing on the bill on June 27th, 2023, and the bill was approved unanimously in my committee on September 25th and in the Judiciary Committee on October 17th. The purpose of B 25-135 is to amend the Illegal Dumping Enforcement Act of 1994 to enhance the district's ability to enforce its ban on illegal dumping. It grants the Office of the Attorney General the authority to file civil lawsuits for damages, civil penalties, recovery of the district's response costs, and injunctive or other relief against those who violate the illegal dumping prohibition. The legislation also clarifies that OAG, rather than the U.S. Attorney's Office, is responsible for prosecuting misdemeanor violations of the illegal dumping prohibition. In addition, the bill amends the definition of solid waste in the Illegal Dumping Enforcement Act to explicitly include appliances, mattresses, furniture, shopping carts, and tires, recognizing civil laws as a critically important enforcement tool, and every other major environmental statute in the DC Code grants OAG civil enforcement authority. Closing this enforcement gap in the illegal dumping statute will help ensure that businesses and individuals who engage in illegal dumping do not evade accountability where criminal prosecution may be inappropriate or infeasible, or administrative fines may be insufficient to address the harms and deter future misconduct. Importantly, OAG has shared that its intent is to focus on repeat and high-impact offenders. There is an extensive and persistent problem of illegal dumping in the district, imposing significant environmental, health, and economic harms in communities where it occurs. Unfortunately, if not surprisingly, these harms fall disproportionately on low-income communities and communities of color. Expanding the district's toolkit to combat illegal dumping is critical for addressing such environmental racism and racial inequities, and for improving quality of life generally in the district. And I urge my colleagues to support this measure. I ask the measure be placed on the consent agenda for the legislative meeting to follow. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much, Councilmember Nadeau, for your partnership in this bill. I want to thank our colleague, Councilmember Gray, for introducing this important bill back in February of 2023. And as Councilmember Nadeau noted, illegal dumping really disproportionately harms low-income and disenfranchised communities across the district. In 2022 alone, we had 14,000 311 requests placed for service related to illegal dumping. This is a huge challenge. I think this bill makes a significant step towards strengthening our ability to combat illegal dumping in the district and ensure that we have the tools to actually enforce it when these violations occur. I'll also note the bill expands the definition of solid waste as well to explicitly cover items that are commonly discarded, like tires and mattresses, to ensure that we're being responsive to what we're seeing in the community. I understand that this bill has been placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting and appreciate all of our colleagues' support.
Thank you, both council members. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Does it have a fiscal impact?
It does not.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next four measures were reported out of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, chaired by Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie. There's no objection. The first two measures concerning the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board will be considered in block. PR 25-801, Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board, Ryan L. Jones, Confirmation Resolution of 2024. And PR 25-803, Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board, David Meadows, Confirmation Resolution of 2024. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. Proposed Resolution 25-801, the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board, Ryan L. Jones Confirmation Resolution of 2024 was introduced on May 10th, as was Proposed Resolution 25-803, the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board, David Meadows Confirmation Resolution of 2024. And both were introduced by you and referred to the Committee on Business and Economic Development on June 11th, 2024. Proposed Resolution 25-801 will confirm the appointment of Ryan L. Jones as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board for a term to end on May 7th, 2027. Mr. Jones is a DC-based attorney and litigator with a focus on intellectual property law. As the founder and principal of Ryan L. Jones Law, LLC, he previously served as an Associate Attorney General for special projects with the DC Office of the Attorney General. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Stony Brook University, a Juris Doctor from Southern Illinois University School of Law, and his Master of Laws from George Washington University School of Law. He is a Ward 5 resident. Proposed Resolution 25-803 would confirm the appointment of David Meadows as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board for a term to end May 7th, 2028. Mr. Meadows has an extensive history working in District of Columbia government and in activism in the District of Columbia, having served in various capacities for 28 years. He previously served as the Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to Councilmember Anita Bonds, and also previously served as the Executive Director of the DC Democratic Party. He earned his bachelor's degree from the College of Southern Maryland and is a Ward 8 resident. Well, with that, I would move both resolutions and ask that they be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. Are there questions from members? Councilmember Pinto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. I do want to note a significant concern I have regarding the composition of the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board as we consider confirming 2 additional board members who sound very qualified. I want to highlight an oversight in the lack of Ward 2 representation that we see on the board. ABCA oversees over 2,400 licensed establishments in our district, and over 35% of those are in Ward 2, which is disproportionately more than any other ward by far. Yet among the 4 current board members and the 2 nominees before us, Ward 2 has zero representation. This is not just a matter of geographic equity. The decisions made by this board directly impact the daily operations, safety, and economic vitality of hundreds of businesses in Ward 2. And our ward bears, as I noted, the greatest concentration of ABCA-regulated establishments, but has no voice in the body that governs them. I recognize and appreciate the qualifications of all of our board members, both current and those proposed today, but I do want to note the absence of Ward 2 representation, creating a blind spot, I think, in the board's understanding of our unique challenges and needs that we have. So I support these board nominations, but I urge the executive and our colleagues to stay focused on ensuring that we advance qualified Ward 2 residents to correct this imbalance as we move forward with the future appointments to ABCA.
While I didn't have a question, Mr. Chairman, I will acknowledge and share in the concerns raised by the Ward 2 council member. And just for the record, note that while it wasn't brought up during the nominations of these two resolutions, Councilmember Pinto and I have talked about it in the past, as has council members who also would like to see better representation or more geographic representation from the wards of the District of Columbia. I share in that concern and have raised that concern with the executive.
Councilor McDuffie, you said you have raised that concern with the executive?
I have raised that concern with the executive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions with regard to these two nominations? Madam Associate General Counsel, are these two measures legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, they are.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete for each?
Yes.
And Madam Budget Director, these are confirmations, and so there's no fiscal impact statement.
Correct.
Objection, these measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. Bill 25-488, Great Streets Program Expansion Neighborhood Retail Priority Amendment Act of 2024. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. This measure was introduced by Councilmember Allen and myself as the Mount Vernon Eastern Market, Barracks Road, Great Streets Neighborhood Retail Priority Amendment Act of 2023 on September 21st, 2023. This bill was referred to the Committee on Business and Economic Development on October 3rd, 2023, and the committee held a hearing on the measure on June 20th, 2024. The Great Streets Program is led by the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development and offers local businesses in eligible corridors, grant opportunities, technical support, and other supporting programs. The purpose of this program is to incentivize commercial revitalization by assisting existing businesses, attracting new companies and small businesses, and creating jobs for District of Columbia residents. As introduced, this bill would expand the district's retail priority areas to encompass Mount Vernon Triangle, Eastern Market, and Barracks Road neighborhoods to be eligible for the district's Great Streets program. The committee print expanded upon this by adding in the Georgia Avenue retail areas by expanding Georgia Avenue's Great Streets eligibility further south to include the retail area along Georgia Avenue, south until it meets Howard University. And myself and my team work with the Office of Councilmember Nadeau and the Councilmember herself on these particular changes. With that, I'd ask that the resolution be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. I'll move it.
It was Great Street.
Oh, it is.
You're asking that the bill be placed on the agenda. Are there questions? Are there questions from members?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much. Through you to Mr. McDuffie, I want to thank you very much for your team's work on moving this forward and posing to make sure I've posed it as a question. The legislation today is going to help really fill a pretty significant kind of hole in the donut, like a gap of many of our commercial corridors that were not a part of the Great Streets program. And then concurrently with the action you're taking a little bit later in the agenda, where to make sure that they're eligible for the January application process, there'll be emergency legislation concurrent with this permanent bill so that they'll be able to apply for grants. Do we think this is going to be a great thing for our small businesses on these important commercial corridors to help make sure that they have access to our Great Streets program and help support our thriving and wonderful local businesses all over DC?
Yes, I think the expansion of this Great Streets bill will be a great thing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it
Is
does.
there a fiscal impact?
There is not.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next measure is Bill 25-573, Bruce Monroe Disposition Extension Approval Act of 2024. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. Without objection, I'd love to move to postpone this bill until our next committee of the whole meeting.
There's a motion to postpone this. If there's no objection, it will be postponed by unanimous consent. Now it's postponed to the next.
The next committee of the whole meeting.
So ordered. The next three measures were reported out of the Committee on Health, chaired by Councilmember Christina Henderson. The first is PR 25-959, Board of Respiratory Care, Carla Seals Confirmation Resolution of 2024. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-959 nominates Carla Seals for reappointment to the Board of Respiratory Care for a term to end July 16, 2026. Ms. Seals is a respiratory therapist licensed in the District of Columbia. She's the lead therapist at Bridgepoint Hospital and has worked there for over 20 years. She's passionate about educating her patients on diseases that affect their heart and lungs and provides patients with individualized respiratory care plans. Ms. Seals received her Associate of Applied Science in Respiratory Care from the University of the District of Columbia and a Bachelor's in Healthcare Administration from the University of Phoenix. She is a Ward 5 resident. I ask that this nomination be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, council members. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements? Because there's no fiscal impact statement required.
You're trying to trick me?
Something like that. I read the same question every time and realize, why am I asking the question if it's not required, except that we should note that it's not required. So the answer is it's not required.
Correct.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. Bill 25-672, Radiation Protection Act of 2024. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill 25-672, the Radiation Protection Act of 2024, was introduced on January 26, 2024 by Chairman Mendelson on behalf of the mayor. It was subsequently referred to the Committee on Health and the Committee on Transportation and Environment. On September 17, 2024, the bill was re-referred to the Committee on Health with comments from the Committee on Transportation and the Environment. The district's ability to regulate harmful sources of radiation is critical to protecting public health, particularly in healthcare settings. Radiation machines and equipment are broadly used to diagnose health conditions and conduct research. Although these uses are largely beneficial, high exposure or frequent exposure to radiation can have an acute and long-term health implications. Bill 25-672 requires the mayor to regulate ionizing radiation, which includes X-ray machines and CT scanners. Although the executive has been regulating ionizing radiation since the 1970s, this authority has never been actually codified into district law. The bill also authorizes the mayor to regulate non-ionizing radiation, which includes MRI machines as well as ultrasound equipment. This is the most significant policy change in the bill. Currently, DC Health would need to request authority from the Food and Drug Administration to enforce any actions against handlers of non-ionizing radiation equipment. The committee print, which makes significant improvements to the bill as introduced, include aligning the licensing, certification, and registration requirements for medical radiation health professionals within the HORA, which the council passed earlier this year. We narrow the executive's authority regarding non-ionizing radiation to focus solely on equipment used in clinical healthcare settings and enhance the enforcement provisions to ensure that the executive can swiftly act when there is an immediate threat to public health, which also ensures due process and procedural safeguards. The OCFO reported that the bill would cost well, I don't want to take this from the budget director, but there is a cost associated with this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Sorry, Jim, don't want to steal your thunder.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Is there a fiscal impact?
There is a fiscal impact of 142,000 in FY '25 and 445,000 over the 4-year plan.
And the government can absorb 35,000. Okay. That's an earlier issue. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. Councilmember Henderson, Bill 25-759, Child Behavioral Health Services Dashboard Amendment Act of 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill 25-759, the Child Behavioral Health Services Dashboard Amendment Act of 2024, was introduced on March 28, 2024 by Councilmembers Parker, Fruman, Robert White, Allen, Bonds, and Gray. I co-sponsored this legislation. The bill was referred to the Committee on Health on April 2nd, 2024, and the committee held a public hearing on the bill on July 11th. We unanimously approved the committee print on October 22nd. This bill would address significant challenges in accessing behavioral health information and services for children and youth in the district. District children and their families are facing immense behavioral health challenges. According to 2021 data from the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, 18% of DC high school students reported seriously consider attempting suicide, and 36% reported feeling sad or hopeless. These issues are only worsened by the difficulty families encounter in accessing timely and specialized behavioral health services. While the district may have many of these behavioral health services available, the current system is fragmented and very difficult to navigate. Providers maintain their own websites that are not always user-friendly for families, caregivers, or youth themselves. Additionally, it is challenging to find specific information about the specific types of populations served by these facilities, such as youth experiencing homelessness, youth in the custody of DYRS, or victims of gun violence. This lack of clarity can lead to confusion and delays in care. Bill 25-759 requires the development of a publicly accessible behavioral health services directory and dashboard overseen by DC Health. The directory will consolidate vital information on available services across the district, and the dashboard would include real-time data on service capacity and eligibility requirements. By centralizing this information into one easy-to-use platform, the bill aims to streamline the access to the care for children, youth, and their families. This bill will, I believe, greatly improve access to behavioral health information for district youth and families. And I want to thank our colleague, Councilmember Zachary Parker from Ward 5 and his team on introducing and championing this important bill. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I ask for colleagues to support this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Are there questions from members? Madam Associate General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Is there a fiscal impact?
There is a cost of 111,000 in FY '25 and 460,000 over the 4-year financial planning period.
Thank you. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. That's going to complete the business for the committee of the whole. We will adjourn, set up, and begin the legislative meeting at 12:40. The time is 12:33, and this meeting's adjourned. I'm calling to order this meeting. This is an additional meeting of the Council of the District of Columbia. And it's the 32nd legislative meeting of Council Period 25. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council. And today is Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. The time is 12:52 in the afternoon. And we are meeting in the Council Chambers, Room 500 of the John A. Wilson Building. This meeting is being broadcast on Council Channel 13 and is also available on the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov. I feel like I'm forgetting something. This is an additional meeting, and I'm now repeating myself. And I'm Phil Mendelson. We always begin our legislative meetings with a moment of silence. If we could observe that in the chamber, please. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Allen,
Here.
Councilmember Bonds. Here. Councilmember Freeman,
Present.
Councilmember Gray is absent. Councilmember Henderson,
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George is absent. Councilmember McDuffie.
Here.
Chairman Mendelson,
Present.
Councilmember Nadeau,
Here.
Councilmember Parker,
Here.
Councilmember Pinto,
Present.
Councilmember Robert White,
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. You're calling the roll reminded me of a couple of things. One is congratulations to our colleague, Councilmember Denise Lewis George, who had a baby, Pierce James, I think is his name, on Saturday morning. Pictures are very cute. All the members have wished her the best. So I want to acknowledge that. And on the other hand, also acknowledge our colleague Vince Gray, who last week announced it. His health has not been improving as much as he would like, which is why he's not here today, and our best wishes are with him. Having said that, we have the consent agenda before us. There are two changes that I know of. On page 1, item B1, which is Bill 25-49, Local Rent Supplement Program Eligibility Amendment Act of 2024, is removed from the consent agenda. And on page 2, item 8, which is actually C8, and I misspoke, 9, item 9. Bill 25-573, Bruce Monroe Disposition Extension Approval Act of 2024 is removed from the agenda. It was postponed at the Committee of the Whole. Are there any other changes to the consent agenda? I'm hearing none. So the vote will be on the consent agenda with those two items removed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Councilmember Trayon White, was that a no vote or a late aye vote?
Aye.
All right. So I hear no, no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. We'll turn to Bill on page 1, Bill 25-49, Local Rent Supplement Program Eligibility Amendment Act of 2024. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the bill that you introduced a few years ago that we've had in effect for a few years now, with some updates to reflect feedback from the DC Housing Authority and residents. The fundamental purpose of this bill was to make sure that people can access our local voucher programs more easily, even if they don't initially have all of the paperwork together that would be required for a federal voucher, and even if they have certain criminal records or immigration statuses that would make them ineligible for federal housing assistance. As we discussed at first reading a couple weeks ago, the Housing Committee made some changes to the bill. We accepted the Housing Authority's recommendation to allow them to require ID when local voucher holders go to recertify, which is typically after 2 years. And we allowed the Housing Authority to use information about a person's criminal system involvement against that person if they're doing something criminally dangerous once they're already in the local voucher program. In both cases, we've made sure to put some new safeguards in place. We voted in favor of this new and improved version of your important bill a couple of weeks ago. I urge my colleagues to continue to support this bill. I also have an amendment which I'd like to move now.
So move the amendment. I didn't see it, so it was circulated on the, by email?
Yes, it was circulated at 6 p.m. yesterday. So the amendment makes a couple clarifying tweaks based on feedback from the DC Housing Authority after our markup. First, there's a provision in the committee print that lets DCHA check for mismatches between the new voucher eligibility standards in the bill and more restrictive federal requirements for specific buildings. DCHA asked us to make it more explicit that we're talking about projects supported by federal low-income housing tax credits. I don't anticipate this coming up in many cases, but we're trying to be accommodating to DCHA. Second, you'll recall that the committee print allows DCHA to take action against a person's local vouchers when there's a preponderance of evidence that a person is engaged in criminal activity after getting their voucher and poses a threat to others if they stay in the program. The amendment clarifies in the bill text something that I thought was already clear in our discussion a couple weeks ago. DCHA is allowed to start looking into criminal legal system records about a person who's already in the local program in the process of making those determinations. This could come up in situations where a landlord or law enforcement makes allegations to DCHA about a tenant. Again, this was always the committee's intent. It's just about tightening up the bill text. So I'd like to move the amendment at this time.
Thank you, Councilmember White. What time was it circulated yesterday?
Around 6 p.m.
So members have it that way? No, he said 6. We have the amendment before us. Is there discussion on the amendment? If there's no objection, the amendment will be accepted. The amendment is accepted without objection. We have the bill as amended before us. Is there further discussion? Just a moment. The vote will be on the bill as amended. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed?
Mr. Chairman, please record me as voting no.
The ayes have it, and the bill is approved as amended on final reading. We will turn to page, there's no page number. The non-consent agenda, item V, B, reading and vote on emergency legislation. The first measure is PR 25-1029, closing of public alley in square 5051, SO 21-00136, second emergency declaration resolution of 2024. This is an emergency version of permanent legislation to close this alley, which the permanent legislation is currently undergoing mayoral review and will go through congressional review afterward. So this emergency is necessary to prevent a gap in the law. This is on non-consent because it's not simply a congressional review. This bill also amends district law to require the tax abatement financial analysis by final reading rather than before a hearing. So that's substantively new to the alley closing, but this was a good vehicle to do this. So that is the underlying measure. I move the declaration. So moved. Is there discussion? The vote will be on the declaration. All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? I don't hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. I move the underlying bill, Bill 25-1009. Is there discussion? All those in favor of the bill say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? I don't hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimous. The next measure is Medical Cannabis Clarification and Program Enforcement Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2024, PR 25-1027. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. The council approved the Medical Cannabis Clarification and Program Enforcement Amendment Act of 2024, passed on second reading on October 1st, 2024, to address the clarifications and improvements to the district's medical cannabis program. The permanent legislation repealed outdated emergency and temporary legislation, so it's necessary that the repealers and the provisions of the permanent legislation take effect immediately to prevent any conflicts in the law. So move.
The declaration is before us. Is there discussion? The vote will be on the declaration. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? I don't hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. The underlying bill, Bill 25-1007, Councilmember McDuffie.
So move.
Discussion? All those in favor of the bill say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. The measure is approved. The next measure is Department of Energy and Environment Rulemaking Clarification Emergency Declaration Resolution 2024, PR 25-1026. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The District Department of the Environment Establishment Act of 2005, as you might have guessed it, established the District Department of Environment as an agency within the executive branch of the District of Columbia government. The Department of the Environment was later renamed the Department of Energy and Environment, or DOEE, as it's known today. The original language of DOE's Establishment Act required that the mayor issue rules to implement provisions of the act within 180 days of its effective date. Those rules and regulations were to be submitted to the council for a 45-day period of active review, meaning they would be deemed disapproved if the council did not approve the proposed rules by resolution. The rationale for requiring active approval of the rules was to ensure the council could review the initial rules and regulations promulgated by the newly established agency. In 2021, the council enacted the Green Food Purchasing Amendment Act of 2021, which granted DOEE additional rulemaking authority for the purpose of implementing provisions of that new law. However, due to a drafting error, the Green Food Purchasing Amendment Act unintentionally subjects all new rules and regulations promulgated by DOEE to the 45-day active review period that had been reserved for the rules and regulations promulgated during DOEE's establishment. We're all following here. This error could undermine the legal status of the rules that did not receive active approval and impairs the agency's ability to promulgate rules and regulations necessary for implementing the district's environmental laws in a timely manner. And this emergency is necessary to clarify the agency's authority to issue rules. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I move the declaration.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Discussion. We have the declaration before us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? I don't hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. The underlying bill, Bill 25-1005, Councilmember Allen.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Is there discussion? On the bill, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. The next measure is Great Streets Program Expansion Neighborhood Retail Priority Amendment Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2024, PR 25-1030. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. The council today has approved at the Committee of the Whole and voted on the first reading of the permanent version of this bill, B 25-48. The council must pass an emergency version of this bill, as was alluded to earlier, to ensure that the small businesses located in the new retail priority corridors that will be created by this legislation will have the ability to apply for the Great Streets Program funding when the applications open in January of 2025. And so it's important that we move in an emergency situation. And so I move the declaration, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion?
Chairman
Councilmember
Nadeau.
Nadeau.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Councilmember McDuffie for moving forward, not only the permanent, but the emergency legislation here. We had some corrections and updates we needed to make in Ward 1, and I'm very glad we were able to get that done together. And I appreciated the opportunity to work together on that permanent as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? We have the declaration before us. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the ayes have it unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-1010. Councilmember McDuffie.
So moved.
Is there discussion? On the bill, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-1031, Residential Tranquility Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2024. Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I'm moving the Residential Tranquility Emergency Amendment Act of 2024. Our Declaration of Independence makes clear that we all have certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As the elected leaders of our city, we must uphold our responsibility to our residents to ensure that they can achieve their own pursuit of happiness and enjoy their homes, their neighborhoods, and their lives without unreasonable, persistent disruptions targeting them at night or in the early morning hours. I'm deeply concerned about demonstrations targeting residential homes, disrupting entire neighborhoods, and compromising our residents' fundamental right to peacefully enjoy their homes. As the Supreme Court has emphasized, the state's interest in protecting the well-being, tranquility, and privacy of the home is certainly of the highest order in a free and civilized society. Our homes must remain, in the court's words, the last citadel of the tired, the weary, and the sick. First, let me be crystal clear, this legislation fully upholds and protects the fundamental guarantees of free speech, peaceful assembly, and the right to protest. These First Amendment rights stand as cornerstones of our democracy and ones that I and the District of Columbia have proudly defended throughout our history as a city. Our city has been the site of countless historic demonstrations that have shaped our nation in many ways through the exercise of these essential freedoms, many of which I have participated in myself. I remain committed to preserving robust spaces for public discourse, peaceful assembly, and the right to voice dissent through protest, celebration, and frankly, anything people of our city or visitors want to say. However, what we are witnessing in a few circumstances targeting residents goes far beyond peaceful protest. We are seeing the persistent use of amplified sound devices, blasting noise on a continuous loop in residential areas, demonstrations continuing late into the night or starting in the very early morning hours, and what I think most disturbingly, individuals in some cases throwing projectiles onto homes as a form of harassment and intimidation. These actions create significant negative impacts on residential well-being, leading to heightened stress and anxiety levels among some of our most vulnerable. The current law's quiet hours, which only restrict demonstrations between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., in my view, are not sufficient. So I was moving an emergency legislation today that would have done the following. It would have restricted the hours of demonstration of 3 or more people targeting a residence from 7 p.m. to 9 a.m. It would have prohibited the use of amplified sound devices during demonstrations targeting residential zones. And it would have created, Mr. Chairman, may I have some additional time, please?
Without objection.
And it would have created specific prohibitions targeting projectiles at residents intending to cause fear or intimidation or retaliation. This bill would have filled critical gaps in our existing legal framework to protect residents from targeted harassment. The bill also provides clear guidance for law enforcement by establishing a separate offense for demonstrators continuing to show up after being dispersed. I believed that we had stricken the right balance here and that this emergency is justified by the immediate need to protect our residents and their home and in their homes and neighborhoods and to continue supporting First Amendment rights. We did have a lengthy debate at this morning's breakfast where I heard a number of concerns from colleagues. And frankly, I'm disappointed to share we did not have the votes to pass the emergency bill today. I am not trying to make a point here. I'm not trying to just make a statement without any progress. I'm trying to provide some relief to residents in our community. And as a result, I'm moving an amendment to this bill, which makes changes that I hope accommodate enough colleagues' concerns that we can get something passed today that can provide some immediate relief. So lastly, what our amendment now does is we're still going to prohibit projectiles from being thrown at residents in the course of these protests. And second, it bans the use of amplification devices during protests in residential zones during the hours of 7 to 9 a.m. And during the hours of 7 to 10 p.m. I hope that I can count on colleagues' support. I want to remind everybody in our community, we absolutely have a First Amendment right to make our voices heard. And we also have a responsibility to one another. We are one community, and we have to take seriously our responsibility that we all have as Washingtonians to our neighbors. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. And I'm going to speak in support of this declaration. Councilmember Pinto circulated the revised language so that in addition to the projectile provision and in addition to the definition of sound amplifying device, as was circulated yesterday, the language would be, it is unlawful for a person to use a sound amplifying device to target a residence for purposes of a demonstration between 7 p.m. and 9 o'clock a.m. in residential zones, residential flat zones, or residential apartment zones, as those terms are defined in the District of Columbia zoning regulations. I'm going to repeat some of what I said this morning at the breakfast because I think this should be on the record. I visited one of the sites where there are these demonstrations going on about which there's been quite a bit of complaint. I visited last week. In the morning, I mentioned to members, it was a little hard getting there at 7:30 in the morning. I tried to get there at 7, and the reason why I mentioned that is not for the sympathy, but to emphasize that 7 and 7:30 in the morning are early in the morning, and people are waking up, and it's really people are at home. And yet there were 2 bullhorns in different places that were targeted at a house that was at the corner of 23rd and S Street. Across the street from one of those bullhorns, the decibels by my iPhone registered at 92. And at the source, it was 128. And just to put this in a little bit of context, the NIH, I think this is an NIH website, says that harmful to hearing, maximum exposure time to certain decibel levels is, let's see, 100 decibels, 15 minutes, 103 decibels, 7.5 minutes, 106 decibels, 3.75 minutes. This was 128 at the source. So it actually is dangerous. This bill targets residential zones, deals with only sound amplification, in residential zones, only sound amplification that's targeting a residence. There was some question raised, and actually some folks, the members of the public who've been commenting, question whether this is constitutional. And I read an excerpt from a Supreme Court case in 1988, which was the basis for this underlying law, the Residential Tranquility Act. It says the state's interest in protecting the well-being, tranquility, and privacy of the home is certainly of the highest order in a free and civilized society. Our prior decisions have often remarked on the unique nature of the home, the last citadel of the tired, the weary, and the sick, and have recognized that preserving the sanctity of the home, the one retreat to which men and women can repair to escape from the tribulations of their daily pursuits, is surely an important value. And that was a Supreme Court case that upheld a Brookfield, Wisconsin ordinance that simply prohibited any picketing before or about the residence or dwelling of any individual, far broader than what we're talking about. This is just amplified noise. So what does that mean? That means that if there's a demonstration, it's in a residential area, it falls under the existing law with this amendment. If it's amplified noise, then it can't occur. Amplified noise targeted at a residence, it can't occur between the hours of 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. Just a moment longer if there's no objection. There also were some comments, and I think it's important to note this for the record. Well, some objections we received in writing that, well, this is already prohibited. Well, it's not prohibited. One could argue that the public policy is that there shouldn't be noise above 80 decibels, but in fact, it's not enforceable. And when I visited that site in Calorama last week, there was a Secret Service officer, there were a couple of MPD cars there, and they're unable to do anything. And we've had several hearings on noise-related legislation where every executive agency of this government has testified that the current law is impossible to enforce. So I'm fully supportive of this and hope that other members will be as well. Further discussion? Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am sympathetic for residents who reportedly have dealt with unpleasant noise violations for the past 2 years, really. And we have some of those residents in the chamber today. I know that experiencing protests, especially those that go on for a long period, can be a hardship. And I appreciate Councilmember Pinto's leadership to help those residents. Nonetheless, I continue to believe that the council should not make changes proposed in this measure on an emergency basis. Modifications to our criminal code, especially those that implicate the First Amendment, should be done through regular order. Regular order is not just about public input. Regular order requires a markup, which creates a record of our legislative aims and how the laws we pass are tailored to meet those goals. Regular order also provides multiple opportunities for amendment to ensure that we strike the right balance and have chosen the right solution. By all accounts, this matter that we're discussing today has gone on for, I believe, 2 years, more than enough time for this body to properly weigh in. Process matters because it can lead to better outcomes. While I appreciate efforts by Councilmember Pinto to address concerns raised, I still have several issues with the underlying emergency. First, it is still not clear to me why we're rushing to criminalize more conduct without first trying to amend our noise ordinances. And second, key terms in the legislation remain vague, especially the failure to define what is meant by targeting in a residential area, even as it exists in the underlying code. Expanding the scope of the district's police power, even with the goal of preventing disruptive behavior, is a step we should be loath to take on an emergency basis. Even if this law yields no arrest, it has the potential to meaningfully change the relationship between protesters and law enforcement. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard when such important interests are at stake. And so I will be voting no on this measure today. Yet I still appreciate the significant changes Councilmember Pinto has made to the emergency just from this morning's discussion. Imagine where this proposal could be if it went through regular order and we had more time to strengthen it. And I'll end there, but I stand ready to work with colleagues and Councilmember Pinto to find a more appropriate permanent solution. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion?
Chairman,
Councilmember Tran White.
Thank you. When I first read it, I want to thank Councilmember Pinto for her leadership on this. I do not know if this is the answer to where we're trying to go. The point of demonstrations is to bring attention, as we know, to those who may not feel like they have a voice. This bill has not been subjected to a public hearing or roundtable, yet we're voting on this in an emergency basis without public input. I don't know if we are to dictate how people should exercise their First Amendment rights. Is it fair to tell anyone how to express their pain, particularly in the nation's capital, which is a critical parcel in the country where people come to amplify their voices and be heard? And I'm concerned that we are moving too fast without having the proper hearing and input from everyone. It is the current law which restricts certain activities between, I believe, 10 and 7 a.m. And this law changed that time. And I heard you, Chairman, say that you went to a demonstration that the sound decibel was at 92. You got closer to being 100. I think that the law already speaks to a residential area not being louder than 55. And I even saw 80 somewhere. But I believe you said it's not enforceable. I'm concerned about this legislation. It was noted also in a breakfast meeting that many posters have been very early or late during periods of coverage by Councilman Pinto this morning in the breakfast. This to indicate the hours they want to protest about whatever it is that they like to protest. I do not support or concede to people throwing objects or projecting things at people, all places and spaces or houses. So I agree with some of this, but the process is what I'm not in agreement of. So I will be voting no today in hopes that we can go back and look at this to ensure that we are upholding the First Amendment rights for individuals in the nation's capital or visiting the nation's capital. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further on this, Councilmember Fruman?
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson, and thank you, Councilmember Pinto, for your work on this important legislation. I think we all entirely support the right of First Amendment protest, and we've all participated in protests. We've all been content to see protests in positions that are opposite to the positions that we hold. It is a very important thing that everyone have the right to protest. The idea that protest can be regulated in the context of a residential neighborhood is not controversial. The Supreme Court has been very, very clear about it. The idea that we have regulated in this place is not controversial. We passed a law on this. It has been in place. It has a time limit. It has a number limit on how many people can be protesting, targeting a resident, using the term. It's part of our law, and we have regulated in this area. We have seen increases in these kinds of protests, and there is the protests in Kalorama. There are protests in Barnaby Woods and Forest Hills, where there are very significant attacks early in the morning at a time when families are getting up, getting their kids ready to go to school. What we do here is make a modification in the hours in order to protect families and communities from the kind of aggressive disruption that we have seen in these contexts. Go ahead and protest at other times, but please don't intimidate families, don't intimidate children as they're getting ready to go to school. I would have liked to see the bill passed as it was originally formulated. If this is what can be done, then this is what can be done. But we shouldn't act as if this is all new territory that we've just jumped on at the last minute. A few weeks ago, attended a hearing on permanent legislation that touched on these subjects and listened to the agencies tell us they couldn't do anything. And so this is in part a response to the idea that the agencies are telling us they can't enforce the rules that exist now because they don't have the right tools. Now, somebody could say, well, the agencies ought to do that, but they're telling us they don't have the tools. We can't blame it on the executive. The executive supports this legislation. If we can't pass this legislation, it's on us. And we owe it to these communities and these families to get this passed.
Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. Like my colleagues, I take the First Amendment incredibly seriously, and we have to. And I think we should not make changes on emergency that affect First Amendment rights. But the idea has been introduced to residents, and so I think we are where we are at this point. But I also want to be clear. Throwing smoke bombs at people's houses is not protest and is not okay. Waking people's children up with sirens early in the morning is not okay. Those things don't further a cause, and we do have residents that we have to protect who have kids that don't feel safe, who are being followed around their neighborhood, who can't use their local park, who have people, many if not all of them, who don't live in the district, being paid to do these things. And so we have to take a sober approach and understand, what is free speech and protest and what is harassment. Now, the reason I understand what's happening is because I had a conversation with the mayor earlier this morning, and agreed that it would be helpful if she put a couple of people in touch with me to help understand the issue. So I was expecting 2 or 3 emails. Unfortunately, the mayor shared my cell phone number with dozens of people, so I've gotten over 30 of calls to my cell phone during a legislative meeting, and I don't find it funny because I can't return them. And so I look like a jerk to residents who are reaching out to me because the mayor told them to call her. So that didn't help, and I'm irritated. But I appreciate having had the opportunity to hear from some residents about what they're facing, to put myself in their shoes and to say, if I was in their situation, would I see this as a First Amendment issue or not? And I think, when it comes to our families, people throwing things at our homes, that is not protected speech. And so as we figure out what to do in permanent legislation, it makes sense to protect families in the interim. So I'm going to vote in favor of this bill today, the emergency bill, but I think it's important that we move a permanent bill forward quickly as opposed to extending this emergency too long. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Protest by its very nature is supposed to make us uncomfortable. Protest by its nature is loud, it is uncomfortable, and that is by design. And I think the reason why we should be very cautious about changing the law around this is that it is actually fairly easy for us to find that which we find offensive, irritating, getting in the way of my daily life, the easiest to say, I need to see that changed. It is a hard thing to do to protect our First Amendment rights to protest when it is loud and uncomfortable and in our way. So we should be very careful about that. And that's why when the first version of this was circulated, it was something I had a lot of questions and concerns about and couldn't find my way to support because it was overly broad. I was concerned about that. I also was very concerned about the process. First Amendment laws are ripe for litigation, for headed to the courts. And without a legislative record, which emergency action today will not have the same legislative record, we would put the district's laws further at risk if we had an overly broad statute that we were moving forward. So I wholeheartedly agree with many of my colleagues that have echoed this, that we need to work on permanent legislation, wrestle with the ideas, figure out what we're going to move forward with. What we have in front of us, and I appreciate my colleague for making changes and submitting that, is now a more limited and tailored approach that will seek to address in a more responsible way that which I think people are focused on. But I want us to be very careful that we're not taking an action to limit the speech and amplified noise that we just simply don't like. That to me is very important for us. We don't know how next week is going to go. And the results of an election could mean very different actions get taken and different types of protests need to take place. If we see a different president decide that they want to move mass deportations of DC residents, I'm pretty sure DC values would dictate that we want to protest that. And I don't want us to have taken an action that limits our ability to raise our voice, to have our values heard, and to be able to fight for that which we think is right. So that's why we should be very cautious. I think the legislation in front of us, the revised one, which will be moved once we get past the deck, is a limited and tailored effort that I think will provide some relief to residents that I think Councilor Pinto and others are working on, but also make sure we have a robust and protected First Amendment right. And then I look forward to being able to work on permanent legislation with my colleagues. So I will be supporting the revisions that Councilor Pinto will be moving on the underlying legislation. But I think we should all take caution and be very thoughtful and considerate as we continue to work on permanent legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further on declaration? Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'll make my remarks brief and appreciate the remarks of my colleagues. Even where we differ, I think this is part of the process and really appreciate how we've gotten to this point. Where I started this morning in opposition to the original bill, although deeply empathetic to the residents, I have gotten to a place where I can support it and appreciate the adjustments that have been made in hearing the concerns that I have raised, which I think were significant constitutional concerns around our First Amendment. I end up at yes because my most significant constitutional concerns have been allayed based on the modifications that have been made. I still think, that it has potential to be challenged and that we're going to have to defend it if that challenge indeed ensues. Because I think we've gotten to a place where this bill is narrowly tailored. And I've had an opportunity to go back and look at the bill that I think Councilmember Mendelson originally drafted and the council passed back in 2010 and read through, the purpose and the intent behind it, and think that we are on solid ground today in supporting this measure on an emergency basis. The concerns that remain are the ones that have been expressed by others, that we're doing it on an emergency basis and that we leave for others to wonder outside of this record that we have today, what we meant when we moved this measure forward. I think it's more prudent and more defensible to have a hearing and a record and committee report that really spells out how we arrived at this point. So I'm encouraging my colleagues to move in that direction, whether or not this passes today. But I do appreciate how we got here, and I think this process is sorely necessary with any bill that comes before this body, but in particular where there are significant constitutional implications. And I appreciate that as a council member, but in particular as an officer of the court that has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. I take this really seriously. And so I'm comfortable with voting in support of this today and appreciate the residents who have made it patently clear the hell that they've been living in, having to endure a protest that, whether or not it is designed to target them, has severely diminished their quality of life. And so I want to thank them for conveying those concerns to me and others on this body before this vote today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further on the declaration, Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I want to commend my colleague, Councilmember Pinto. As I said earlier today during our administrative meeting, that I was supporting the original amendment. I continue to support this amendment. I think that this is a 90-day provision. It's an opportunity to bring some relief to the families that are bombarded with this, what I would consider unnecessary sound every day. I understand protests, and as I said earlier today, protests can be without a lot of sound. It can be staging certain actions, but certainly the sound that is disturbing neighbors day in and day out at, as we would call it, all hours of the beginning of our day is truly unnecessary in our community. So I'm very thankful that you have moved the dial. I certainly hope so that more of my colleagues and I can support this because, you know, this has been a struggle in this particular neighborhood for a few years now. And we continue to say, we're looking for a way, but we don't give people, honest members of our community, relief. So this is an opportunity to at least hopefully give them some relief while we continue to struggle with the whole issue of First Amendment rights versus the right of an individual to have life and liberty in our community. So thank you very much.
Before we get to the second round, any other members? I sort of want to speak second round. Do you want to go before or after me, Councilmember? So I want to speak to the two members who said they're going to vote no. I'm being careful so there's no personal privilege here. So there was a comment about following regular order. I explained at the breakfast this morning that because this is amending Title 22, it's a 60-day congressional layover. If we follow regular order, we would have to have a hearing that requires a bill to be introduced. Well, it doesn't require a bill to be introduced, but it takes time. There has to be almost 3 weeks' notice of the hearing. It would take time. And I don't think anybody questions that the degree of noise that's being experienced is an emergency, certainly more of an emergency than many of the other emergencies that we consider at our meetings. There was also the comment that really we ought to look harder at amending our existing noise regulations, which are regulations. So maybe many members have not, but I have either attended or chaired at least 4 hearings, if not 5, on the existing noise regulations. Over and over, the executive branch agencies, DCRA, Department of Buildings, Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection, MPD, the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, they all say the current law, current regulations are not enforceable. They just are not enforceable, as in it's too hard to enforce it. You have to get into inside a residence, you have to have a calibrated noise meter, and then all you can do is just tell the person to turn it down who may have left and will come back later. And so it doesn't get enforced. And we have tried over and over to find ways to amend it. There's a bill pending, which I think was the 5th hearing I've been to, that Councilmember Nadeau, I hope will be moving this fall, but it will not do what this bill does. There was a comment at the breakfast. Well, the way the draft of the bill at breakfast was worded, there's no objection a little longer. The way the bill at breakfast was worded, it would have prohibited using amplification in the middle of the day. Well, what's before us now has resolved that. So amplification can be used during the middle of the day. There was also questions about, well, what if somebody wants to demonstrate early in the morning? And the bill that was before us this morning had changed the hours. Well, what we have before us now doesn't change the hours. All it does is speak to amplification before 9 a.m. and after 7 p.m. I want to remind members, and the public may not know this, and I have to be careful how I say this, but we had a retreat in July, where members, most of the members spoke of their individual personal experiences with demonstrations at their houses. And as I remember, nobody brought up sound amplification, but they did bring up how, well, these were not members' words, but the retreat moderator or leader used the word trauma, how traumatizing these demonstrations are on us. And wasn't it another member of our council who said, I signed up for this, but my neighbors didn't? And that's what we're speaking to here, are the neighbors who didn't sign up for the targeted demonstration at somebody's house. For a demonstration that is sound amplification, that's all we're talking about here. The bullhorn that I measured was 128 decibels. And that's got to be traumatizing. So regular order would take too long. Amending the noise regulations, we're trying, but that's not an answer. I went over my time. Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to briefly address some of what I heard in the debate, and I really want to thank my colleagues for participating in this conversation and this issue. This idea that this is an emergency that we're kind of just putting together is not the case, that this is a quick thing. This has been going on for years, and we have explored every avenue to provide relief, working with DLCP, DOB, MPD, State Department, the mayor's office, the secretary of the district's office, A&C commissioners, neighbors, trying everything we can to accommodate and provide a reasonable set of relief. We have 2 noise bills right now before the council, Harmonious Living Bill and the Amplified Noise Bill, both of which have had hearings where we heard resoundingly from residents, hey, these bills don't go far enough to address the concerns that we're having. And so all of that input has shaped what I believe is our last recourse of emergency legislation that can provide some immediate relief. This idea that we're adding criminalization, I do want to disagree with. This is already the law. The Residential Tranquility Act is already the law. We have to accept the reality, the practical reality, that if MPD doesn't have tools to disperse crowds, then we have no enforcement of our laws. And so I want to be careful with the language that we're using there. Protests can still occur in the district. They will still occur. They should still occur. And that doesn't change under this. I do just want to also note that I'm encouraged to hear a lot of colleagues today talk about support they have for permanent changes. I welcome working with you all as we continue to work on those permanent changes to make sure that hate speech is adequately prosecuted and that we're not allowing for that type of activity to happen to our residents. We welcome protest. Protests can happen here at the Wilson Building. It can happen throughout the city. The chairman mentioned we signed up for that. We also signed up to protect our residents, and our residents are asking for our help. So I thank my colleagues for working with us on this, and I hope everyone can support this reasonable emergency legislation today.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, what we have before us is the declaration. All those in favor of the declaration say aye.
Aye.
All
Mr.
tho-
Chairman,
No votes. Are there any no votes?
can you
No.
please call the roll?
I'm not hearing things. I asked for ayes. Let me start over again. All those in favor of
Mr.
the
Chairman.
declaration say aye.
Aye.
Can you please call the roll?
You're asking for a roll call.
That is correct.
Oh, goody. Madam Secretary, if you would call the roll.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George is absent. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
No.
Councilmember Parker votes no. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
No.
Councilmember Trayon White votes no. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray is absent. Mr. Chairman, there are 9 yeses, 2 nos, and 2 absents.
The declaration is approved. We have the underlying bill. Councilmember Pinto,
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
you have an amendment.
I do have an amendment. I would like to move the amendment that I have circulated via email to members, and I've also passed out a hard copy version to everybody. As articulated during our conversation around the declaration, it makes a couple of changes. Namely, it removes the changes to the hours that protests can happen targeting a residences. So it maintains 2 primary prohibitions. One is on throwing projectiles at a residence while you're engaged in a protest. And the second is making clear that it is unlawful for a person to use a sound amplification device targeting a residence for purpose of a demonstration between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. And in the evening hours as well.
We have the amendment before us. Is there discussion on the amendment? The vote will be on the amendment and then the opportunity for further discussion on the bill. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Chairman, vote me is no.
Councilmember Parker and Councilmember Trahan White will be recorded as no. The amendment passes. We have the bill as amended before us. Any further discussion? On the bill itself, voice vote. All those in favor of the bill say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Madam Secretary, that would be Trahan White and Zachary Parker voting no. The bill is approved, as amended is approved. We have temporary legislation. If there's no objection, I'll move the first 2 together. Department of Energy and Environment Rulemaking Clarification Temporary Amendment Act of 2024. Great Streets.
Which one?
Program
Mr. Chairman,
expansion. Yes.
Great Streets, if I could move to postpone indefinitely, the number 2, Great Streets Program Expansion,
We voted on.
because the permanent is running on the same track.
You also could just withdraw it, I think.
It's an option.
There's no objection, it'll be postponed indefinitely. All right. Councilmember Allen, you want to move the first one?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
That's Bill 25-1006.
It sure is.
Department of Energy and Environment Rulemaking, temporary. All those in favor of the temporary say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Great Streets has been postponed. Oh, if there's no objection, it's postponed indefinitely. Hearing no objection, it's postponed indefinitely. Residential Tranquility Temporary Amendment Act of 2024, Bill 25-1013, Councilmember Pinto.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
I'm assuming what you're moving is amended to be the same as the emergency.
That's right. As amended, reflected the same in the temporary as the emergency, with leave for staff to make conforming technical changes.
For general counsel. Discussion on Bill 25-1013. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
I only heard one no. Councilmember Trahan White, are you voting no on this?
No. I'm voting no. That's something to say.
Yes, no. All right, the temporary is approved with 2 no votes. We'll turn to other business. Councilmember Allen, you have a motion to override mayoral veto of Bill 25-978, the DC Circulator Transition Emergency Amendment Act of 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as we all know, The mayor's FY25 proposed budget completely terminated the DC circulator. As originally described to the council, the wind down would take place over the course of the fiscal year with a complete end to service anticipated sometime in spring of 2025. Unfortunately, the council was unable to restore funding for the mayor's budget cuts, which would have required significant cuts to other agencies or a new source of revenue. However, in an attempt to provide a smoother transition for both circulator riders who are about to lose their bus rides and the workers who were losing their jobs, the council required the District Department of Transportation begin coordinating with WMATA to explore either absorbing and maintaining the circulator service or providing supplemental service. The law also required that DDOT submit monthly reports to the council providing updates on that wind down. Not only were those reports late, but with only a few weeks advance notice, the executive announced it was advancing the timeline for the circulator wind down, leaving riders without bus service and bus operators and staff without a job beginning as soon as October 1st and no later than December 31st, 2024. This created significant challenges for riders who relied on the circulator for critical transit connections. And for the workers, it meant they were losing their jobs months sooner than expected with no serious transition plan in place. Mind you, these are people we were hailing as heroes during the pandemic when they showed up to work and kept the buses running. I think they deserve better than what they've gotten in this budget. Overriding this veto and protecting what this council has already approved is an effort to make sure we do right by these workers who have dedicated their careers to district residents and to our riders. The DC Circulator Transition Emergency Amendment Act of 2024 was passed on October 1st of this year by the council. The bill required that money from the sale, lease, or transfer of DC Circulator assets be deposited into the DC Circulator Fund and expended to support those DC Circulator workers. The bill would also require that the mayor submit all reprogramming requests related to the DC Circulator to the council for prior approval. Finally, the bill directed the District Department of Transportation to coordinate with WMATA to determine the feasibility of assuming control of the DC Circulator, providing alternative or additional bus service, or hiring former DC Circulator workers at their current pay and seniority status. Unfortunately, last week, the mayor announced that she was vetoing the bill. In her veto letter, the mayor opens by describing the cuts to the DC Circulator as a council-enacted budget reduction. This is a bit of creative retelling of the budget process, at best generously minimizing the executive's role in one, choosing to eliminate the service, two, failing to comply with the council mandated reporting requirements that could have eased the transition for both workers and riders, and three, after council's approval of the mayor's budget cuts, then dramatically moving up the timeline for service reductions and worker layoffs with little warning. The mayor's veto letter also describes the bill as an attempt to, quote, create a new standard for contractor jobs, end quote. As we discussed when the council unanimously approved the emergency legislation just a couple of weeks ago, the bill does not attempt to create a new standard applicable to all contract employees. Rather, the council's specific interest in supporting DC Circulator workers during their transition to other employment is in part a recognition of the tremendous service DC Circulator workers have provided to residents and visitors in the district. During the pandemic, for example, DC Circulator workers continue to provide vital transit services. Mr. Chairman, I have 30 more seconds.
Without objection.
Thank you. To hail these workers as essential workers during the pandemic, to only now abandon them in a transition away from local bus service because they are, quote, only contractors, I think is inconsistent with the district values and with our own statements regarding the value of their service. And to the extent this fund can help these workers transition to WMATA at their current rate of pay or seniority level, that could help strengthen the entire region's public transit system. Finally, on the issue of funding, the mayor's raised several issues. First, she claims the bill does not account for the costs of DDOT's administering the program. Not true. The bill allows DDOT to set aside 10% of the new revenue to administer this new funding source. That was actually at the request of DDOT that we added that in. Second, she claims the bill does not account for the loss of revenue to the surplus property fund or the general fund. However, my office has consulted with the budget office, and it doesn't appear the projected revenue from the sale of the circulator assets was even accounted for in the most recent budget, and that's consistent with what DDOT told us at the budget hearings. I understand the mayor doesn't agree with the underlying policy at issue here, and that's her prerogative, but I stand by our own budget office determination here and have not been presented with any specific evidence from the executive or the CFO that undermines their conclusions here. I know that I am at time, so I'm happy to answer any questions my colleagues might have. But with that, I ask my colleagues to join me in once again overriding this veto and support these workers as they transition to new forms of employment. And so I move the motion now to override the mayoral veto, Mr. Chair.
We have the override motion before us. Is there discussion? Well, I have something to say. So the mayor's letter criticizes our budget director, our budget office. Madam Budget Director, how did you calculate, how did you figure out the fiscal impact?
The question was, how did we figure this out?
However you want to answer, but this is your opportunity to explain.
Sure.
You did.
Sure. So, when we do fiscal impact statements, we always consult the Office of Revenue Analysis and the impacted agency. So, the mayor makes two assertions here. First is that our FIS doesn't account for the loss of revenue to the fund. There is no loss. In order for there to be a loss, the revenues would have had to have been incorporated into the revenue estimates. If they're not incorporated into the revenue estimates, then there is no loss. This legislation redirects those proceeds to another purpose and does not cause any kind of reduction in the amount of revenue the fund or the general fund was projected to have to operate in FY25. The second assertion is that it does not fully reflect the cost to DDOT. Now, when we first got this bill, when we contacted DDOT said, you know what? We need some money to implement this. We said, okay. Councilmember Allen's staff worked with DDOT, worked with us, worked with ORA to come up with language that they then amended into their emergency that allowed DDOT to use proceeds from the sales of the circulator assets to operate the program. So, this is, just another example of getting feedback, reacting to it, providing them with what they need, and, moving forward. So, I do not have any reservations about this FIS. I believe it to be valid. At the time of issuance, we had worked with all parties that were involved, and they were amenable with our conclusions.
So I know you just said this, but to emphasize the point. So you worked with the OCFO, specifically the Office of Revenue Analysis.
Correct.
You worked with the OCFO
Correct.
on the fiscal impact. This was a collaborative effort,
Correct.
and you worked with the Department of Transportation.
Correct.
And as a result of that collaboration, there were some changes made to the bill
Correct.
to eliminate the fiscal impact.
Correct.
And it has been longstanding practice that you as budget director or the budget office writes fiscal impact statements on emergency bills. Is that correct?
Correct. Emergencies and amendments. Correct.
That's been the practice for,
As long as I've been here, plus many more years.
as long as you've been here, which has been a while, and before that. I just wanted to go over that for the record, since the mayor has, for reasons I don't understand, chosen to criticize the council's budget office. Further discussion on this motion to override?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilmember Parker.
if this is a question to you, if it's not a matter of our budget office, what do you think is at play here? I'm not asking you to read the mayor's mind, but what do you think might be informing the objection?
Well, I have to speculate, and probably I shouldn't, but ever since we approved the budget, the mayor has been very critical of the council for, in her words, being fiscally irresponsible. That she's been critical of us passing emergency bills that are not emergency bills, regular legislation that's subject to appropriation. She was critical of us for raising taxes in the budget. And just as I see this as just another shot at us. Actually, I left out a couple in between. She was critical of how we calculated the various aspects of the budget, such as the vouchers. I want to look to our colleague, Councilmember Robert White, because there was a lot of work with the agency in that case, as well as with the OCFO. But to hear the mayor or her executive agencies, we got it wrong, we screwed up. We don't know how to calculate the budget. We are raising taxes, overlooking that the budget she submitted raised taxes by 350 million this year, and I think it's close to 500 million in next year. Overlook that. Yes, we did raise taxes. Help me if I get this wrong. I think it was about $120 million, of which about 40 million was given back as credits for a net of about 80 million, like the child tax credit. Very irresponsible, Councilmember Parker.
Thank
I
you.
said that with some sarcasm. So I think this is just a continuation of finding any way to criticize us for being fiscally irresponsible.
Yeah, it sounds like politics to me. I would just end by underscoring confidence in our budget office. And I would say our budget director is among the best in the game. And it is not uncommon for our budget director to find errors, make corrections at all parts of government. I'll leave it at that. And so I join you and others by expressing the utmost confidence in our budget office. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anything further on the motion to override? The vote will be on the motion to override the mayoral veto of Bill 25-978. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any no votes? The vote is unanimous. I don't hear any no votes. The vote is unanimous. And the veto is overridden. That's going to conclude the business of this meeting. The next legislative meeting of the council will be November 12th. And it will almost certainly be preceded by committee of the whole. Just a moment. I received a very misleading note about voting on November 12th, but the note really meant to say, to remind folks that they need to vote on November 5th and that early voting has already begun. And it's important that, once again, residents of the district show the political concern that we have for government by voting. That's what we do when we vote, is we show our strength, and people should get out and vote. With that, the time is 2:04 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.